Hi, hello. Let's talk about EigenLayer today. If you're a crypto enthusiast, I'm sure you've already heard of it. And if you haven't, then follow along because I will be discussing what this protocol is all about and how its concept of restaking is causing a lot of buzz in the community, along with obviously looking into the tokens that they have introduced, looking into the new concept of intersubjective forking that they have introduced, and kind of try and wrap my head around how EigenLayer facilitates permissionless innovation within trust networks. So without any further ado, let's start at the very beginning, when Bitcoin actually first came out. When Bitcoin came out, it was revolutionary, right? You could do peer-to-peer transactions anonymously. It was a pioneer for decentralized trust, but the problem here was that it was application specific. What this basically means is that you could use Bitcoin only for what it was meant for, which is peer-to-peer transactions anonymously. It had limited programmability, limited functionality, and protocols were having a hard time trying to build on top of it and leverage its network. There was a need for a general purpose blockchain. And that's when Ethereum came into play. Ethereum allowed protocols to leverage its trust and its security, and therefore ushered in a whole new era of innovation with apps like Uniswap coming into play. But there was still a small issue within the network, and that was that there was no innovation in the infrastructure level of things. This was mainly because Ethereum's trust would not translate down to the stack level. If there was any innovation that was deeper than maybe a smart contract level, it required the developer to build its own network and have its own set of validators who would validate and secure their networks. This came with high barriers to entry and high costs. EigenLayer, I believe, tries to solve this with the whole concept of restaking. But before we get into it, let's talk about what staking initially means and what proof of stake consensus is. In September 2022, Ethereum switched to a proof of stake consensus. What this basically allowed users to do was become instantly validators and be chosen randomly to validate a block of transactions, and after validating it successfully, get rewards. The catch here was that as a user, you would have to stake your ETH to be eligible for validating. What this basically means is that I lock some money in, I do some work, I do the work correctly, I get reward for the work plus the money that I locked in initially. The problem here was, or the challenges that were posed within this network was that Ethereum needed 32 ETH as the minimum criteria to be eligible for staking. 32 ETH is 10 grand. I don't have 10 grand lying around. So what do I do? And even if I do have 10 grand lying around, the second challenge is that it is illiquid. I cannot access the 10 grand unless I'm finished with the validation processes. And if I do these validation processes incorrectly, I'll lose the money. Liquid staking protocols actually do a very good job at addressing both of these challenges. What they do is they pool all the users' ETH together. So if I have 1 or 2 ETH, I deposit it with this protocol and it pools it with all the other users' ETH and then does the validation process for you. Then gets a share of rewards, spreads it around all the users, and keeps a cut for themselves. This solves the whole concept of needing a lot of ETH to begin with. And the whole idea of liquidity is solved when these protocols issue a liquid staking token. This serves as a receipt for your staked ETH originally. You can use this token externally with DeFi protocols to kind of gain yield, but you should be careful because if you lose this token, you lose your rights to get back your staked ETH and your rewards. Now, I feel like it's important to pause here for a minute and kind of understand how restaking addresses these users, validators, and developers. The reason I believe this protocol is catching so much buzz within the market is because it is able to allow permissionless innovation. And we will be getting into understanding how it does so more specifically. But let's just begin by just entering the trenches from the shallow end and discussing what restaking is and what EigenLayer actually introduces. EigenLayer, this is going to sound stupid, but for some reason I believe EigenLayer is a form of LinkedIn. Developers who have new services and need validation to secure it, they can post their situation on EigenLayer and say that, okay, I'm going to offer X% of rewards for all the validators who help me secure my new service. Validators can then opt in to simultaneously validate these new services as well as validating Ethereum's network. And stakers who also want rewards but don't want to do the work or don't have the required ETH can stake with the operators, or in this case, actively validated services that are present within the protocol. And you kind of understand that this allows a lot of innovation to take place because it clears the whole idea of high barriers of entry at the infrastructure level of the blockchain. And it allows developers to leverage the validators within Ethereum's network and kind of leverage Ethereum's security. Let's look into the different types of restaking strategies that this protocol offers, as discussed by Mizari as well. The three basic strategies are such that you can restake ETH directly, you can restake with a liquid provider token, you can restake with your liquid staking token, as we discussed earlier. And what this provides users is, and as well as developers, is flexibility. And I kind of start seeing, you kind of start putting the pictures together and understanding that in a larger view of things, why this protocol would be catching a lot of buzz. Additionally to the strategies of restaking, this protocol also offers a variety of services for its users to kind of make the whole idea of innovation and make the work easier, basically. But what's really interesting is its new concept of intersubjective forking. To explain to you what intersubjective forking is, I would initially ask you to imagine maybe an online forum where you and your friends have a thriving community. You'll engage in discussions, you'll make posts, you'll make blogs, but then suddenly, out of nowhere, one day, there is an imposter among us, pun intended. And this imposter kind of sabotages the forum by posting argumentative work or controversial thoughts and kind of gives rise to a disruption within the forum. He does not break the rule explicitly, so his content is still being allowed to be posted within the forum. And in this case, EigenLayer provides you a solution. EigenLayer allows all the users within the forum to kind of vote whether they want to fork the system or not, using their Eigen token. With the help of Eigen token, if enough people vote that there needs to be a fork within the forum, then the forum will split into two versions. And you can kind of choose which version you would want to be in. Would you rather be in the version that has all these argumentative and controversial arguments, or get into a forum where everything is back to normal and these posts cease to exist? And that kind of is the brief understanding of what intersubjective forking is. To explain to you this in a more technical term, I would say it's for instances of misbehavior that cannot objectively be identified on-chain, yet any two reasonable observers would agree that a penalty is deserved in this scenario. This mechanism is mainly to address the problem of tyranny of majority, and it's basically when a group of people is treated unfairly because their situation is different from the majority of people in the system. But what's even more interesting is their decision to, fork the token rather than the protocol. Because if they followed what chain forking is done in Ethereum social consensus, as you can see on the leftmost slide, where you find a malicious block, you moved back towards it, you trace it back and switch to a new chain of blocks. And Ethereum social consensus kind of keeps a note of all that. If EigenLayer were to do something similar, it would overload Ethereum social consensus by allowing tokens to be the forking concept, it kind of allows Ethereum social consensus to not take any burden and function independently from it, as EigenLayer has to keep track of these token forkings rather than Ethereum social consensus. And it's quite interesting because in this mechanism, the core principle is basically that if there is a fault introduced by any misbehavior, then any challenger can create a fork of the token, create a version where these malicious stakers or malicious people are being slashed or being punished. And with these two possible versions of Eigen tokens, users as well as AVSs and everyone can choose whether they want to value the new version of the token or the original version. And since in the new version, the malicious stakers do not have any allocation, if everyone agrees to move to the new version, they lose the original value of their stake as well. And this entire mechanism is known as slashing by forking. Obviously, EigenLayer also have to instill costs. Otherwise, you could just spam the forking button until it overloads the system. And that's where bEIGEN pulls up. bEIGEN is the token that are for protocols that are fork unaware. So there are different versions of bEIGEN. Eigen token is used to fork the whole idea and fork the Eigen system. But bEIGEN is more in terms of understanding and using it for protocols that are fork unaware and hence have different versions of it. So suppose I use my Eigen token and split bEIGEN1 into bEIGEN2. And this bEIGEN2 is the alternate version where the malicious stakers are slashed. If I was correct and my intersubjective challenge was legitimate, then this bEIGEN token is considered true, and a deflation per fork is a cost that is paid off for switching. And if I was wrong, then there's a commitment per fork that I end up paying, and bEIGEN remains to be valued. And this commitment per fork is the social cost of rejecting the malicious fork that was intended to take place. Now I feel like you have kind of understood all the concepts that needed to be discussed in order to look into maybe the more transformed Ethereum's trust network, now that EigenLayer is built on top of it. Comparing this to what we originally saw, we kind of understand that now Ethereum plus EigenLayer both allow users to kind of look into objectively attributable faults as well as into subjective attributable faults. And it kind of makes it easier to democratize the idea of trust and allow permissionless innovation. The way they're able to do this is through looking into the different restaking strategies that are offered within the protocol. So EigenLayer allows AVSs to mix and match between two modalities of objective staking. They can use their ETH for objective staking and they can use Eigen for intersubjective staking. And in addition to this, they allow AVSs to utilize native tokens as well for providing additional validation and be aligned more towards AVS token stakers. But with everything, there are risks and challenges that need to be looked into. For EigenLayer, the main concern is the early death spiral risk. And this is basically considering that the native token value is very closely tied to the security of the system. So if there's a decrease or change in the system's security, it would lead to a drop in token price, it would lead to a drop in TVL, and then it would have a downward pressure to kind of reach a death spiral of a falling token price. Other risks that revolve around this protocol includes concepts like cascading slashing. Cascading slashing is basically because if an AVS gets slashed, then all the stakers who had put their money with that AVS or operator would also end up getting slashed, resulting in a whole cascading of slashes. Another important risk to consider is the whole idea of centralization of the validator set. This is because this protocol's reliance is potentially smaller when compared to Ethereum when it comes to validator sets, and this raises concerns of centralization and potential manipulation of the network. Yes, EigenLayer primarily uses liquid staked derivatives as collateral, but this represents a claim on staked ETH, and it's several steps removed from the actual underlying asset. So it kind of makes the whole idea of EigenLayer much more risky to move ahead with. And obviously, let's talk about the growing negative sentiment around this protocol because of the airdrop strategy that they chose to adopt, which turned out to be very controversial, with tokens being only distributed around 5% of them to stakers and only restricting to selected regions. This risk, I believe, is something that needs to be dealt with immediately because this protocol depends a lot on community guidelines and community fostering decisions together. Hence the whole idea of democratizing trust within the community. And just to leave you with some food for thought or things to ponder upon till the next video I put up, I would suggest you look into why and how EigenLayer would impact transparency and airdrop strategies for other protocols, considering that it's kind of reducing the dependency of native tokens, giving users the opportunity to restake using ETH and restake using Eigen. What about the liquidity risk it presents? Because EigenLayer as a protocol requires you to lock up your ETH for a period of 270 days before you get access to it again. So regardless of the direction of the market, you cannot gain access to your assets at that time. In conclusion, EigenLayer's concept of restaking is revolutionary, but I believe its airdrop strategy and its reliance on a subjective token distribution has caused user disappointment, and addressing these issues with security concerns should be this protocol's #1 priority right now, and try and understand how you can apply the concept of EigenLayer in real-world applications. And hopefully now you kind of understand why there is so much hype around it and why, like Tony Stark, everywhere I go, I end up seeing EigenLayer's face. Thank you, and I hope to see you again in my next video. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment.